Hi, this is Alex Hellert. This presentation, Le Société du Abondement, translated from French as the Society Description, will focus on how Guy Debord's concept of spectacle interacts with our new emerging form of capitalism based on the subscription service, in which you will no longer be owning private property so much as financial institutions and data miners will own it for you. You are given the image, the simulation of ownership. Guy Debord was born in 1931. He was a French philosopher, originally starting out in the lettrist movement, which took avant-garde films out of Isidore Isao, its leader, and added letters and symbols to them to change its meaning. After having disagreements with the group, he left to form his own, called the Situationist International, which was a libertarian socialist organization that was mainly active in France, but also had some popularity in London and in other countries. These situationists would influence the 1968 student protests and much of the left in the post-war period. The seminal achievement of Guy Debord is Society of the Spectacle, which is the book that I'm going to be talking about more. So what is the spectacle exactly? Well, there are two kinds of spectacle. One is the concentrated, a function of bureaucracy, generally found in mixed economies in the third world, such as former states controlled by colonialism, or the Soviet Union or China. One is required to participate in the spectacle. All force and production are in the hands of the bureaucratic class, who form a pseudo-bourgeoisie. Meanwhile, the diffuse spectacle, what we have in the modern-day Western capitalist democracies, is a consumptive place. What you have is hard to define. You have various competing institutions. There's not one group to point at. The spectacle is, in a sense, more dangerous because in the bureaucracy, the concentrated spectacle, you know who you can point at to, you know who is the problem. If Mao is the enemy, you can point to Mao. If Mao is your friend, you can point to Mao. You become like Mao. Whereas in the diffuse spectacle, you don't really know who your friends are and who your enemies are. All you know is that what is good is being produced and what is being produced is good. How do you get out of it? What are you going to do? Start a revolution? What institutions are you supposed to revolt against once there's so many and they compete against each other? It's not as if workers have ever led a successful revolution. Debord looked at the 19th century communist revolutions and, of course, and the slave revolts in the ancient world, and found that they all failed to actually overthrow their masters. It was only bourgeois revolutions. Now, he may not acknowledge this particularly, but it was brilliantly argued that the Soviet Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, was actually funded by Wall Street capitalists. With the introduction of so-called lean manufacturing, which came out of Japan with Toyota, capitalism took on an even more religious demeanor. One was now a convert or an apostle of that ideology, with 7 deadly sins of waste being the things to be avoided. But rather than the 7 virtues, it was 6 sigma was the answer. Now inventory was seen as a waste. No longer were commodities worshipped or desired even. They were just the unfortunate things that got in the way of the production process. No longer were workers allowed to stand around waiting for the next parts to arrive in the work in process. Instead, they had to work all the time. Anything that was waste was frowned upon. And as we have seen, the destruction of the left makes critiques of these kinds of relationships more difficult to make. 78 million cars on the road will have embedded cyber connections that can be used for monitoring drivers. According to research from Gartner Incorporated, 90% of the new cars sold in the United States and Europe will be connected by 2021, according to Loudon. What does that mean? It means not only will a new company plan, like Volkswagen, be able to take your anti-lock brakes and heated seats and turn them off if you don't pay them a subscription for a car that you own. Not only will that be the case, but the data that your in-dashboard systems or the internal computer of your car use will be turned over to Google or Spotify. They'll know what radio channels you touched. They'll know how fast you're driving. All the data they could collect, they will have. You don't have any privacy anymore. You don't really have private property. In a sense, your car, which will likely to be rented, and if it isn't even rented, you'll have an auto loan on credit driving to a building where you work, which is owned by a bank, back to your house, which is also owned by a bank paid through a mortgage. As you can see, the knowledge economy job that you probably will go to, engage in advertising, contributing to the spectacle, will encompass the various elements of the spectacle. Meanwhile, at home, you'll watch content. You'll watch Netflix. You won't own a DVD or CD. You won't own any movies or films or TV shows. Instead, you'll have to trust that what the corporation charges you is fair and that your data will be fairly used. You shouldn't trust them. Whilst a disproportionate amount of scholarship related to 1968 events focuses on the student-led riots, very little attention was paid, until rather recently, to the contributions of the workers in their general strike. Labor peace returned, and the students were generally abandoned by the workers after a settlement increased the minimum wage by 25%, and also 7% for other workers not covered under the minimum wage, and the introduction of agricultural workers into the state pension system. A clear victory for the working class, organized largely from the reformist socialists and communists, not from the radical left. Pompidou and de Gaulle, the right-wing authorities in charge of France, prime minister, president respectively, were more popular as a result of the rioting. It threatened to bring the government down, but they ultimately survived. And in 1969, the French public reacted much as the same in 1968 with Richard Nixon and George Wallace in the United States. The radical left turned people off and frankly made the workers' movement discredited in the eyes of many who were not of that class. It should be no surprise that the Ukrainian Trotskyist, Alan Krivine, was most supported by les cadres supérieurs and professions libérales, those in the liberal arts and executive positions, the managers. They supported Krivine the most, 3%, and Pompidou, 58%, whereas the PCF, Jacques Duclos, only received 8% from that class. It was a bourgeois revolution through and through, and would ultimately lead to a great deal of nihilism from those who participated in it. Two of the Situationists who led it, along with Debord, threatened to blow up and planned to blow up the Eiffel Tower, not because of any political reasons, but because the light from the tower shined through their bedroom window. They failed. They were betrayed by the workers, ironically. And so what happened? Just as I said, nihilism, drug use, alcohol, suicides. This was the state of the left in the 1970s, and by the time the socialists came to power in the 1980s, these people were relevant. They destroyed the communist movement and the socialist movement as a fundamental force that could be reconciled with the working class, choosing to pursue radical left, feminist, and bizarre liberationist and anarchist strategies, which were not supported by actual workers. And that trend has frankly opened up the room for the capitalists to pursue the kind of agenda I've talked about before. Whilst the disaffected hippies that would become part of the Reagan coalition, or conservatives later in France, many of the Trotskyists supported in the movement became neoconservatives. The Maoists died off. And in this culture of nihilism and drug addiction in the 1970s, we saw that a new individualism was born, one that took away class solidarity and replaced it with personal revolt commodified by capitalism. There's a reason why Google is happy to sell this book, because it isn't revolutionary, no matter what punk rockers or celebrities may have told us. You don't need an app developer. You don't need to hang out with your friends in the city and call it political acts. What you need is a legitimate working class movement. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end. Here are the citations for the presentation. Thank you for watching. And remember, if you have any questions, please comment, because I can answer those a lot better than this short format provides the time for. See you in the comments.